When you survive a crash that should have killed you, you start thinking the universe either hates you or has one hell of a twisted sense of humor. Because instead of dying peacefully, I woke up broken physically, mentally, and somehow employed as a private nurse for one of the coldest men in Manhattan. His name was Elias Monroe, a corporate lawyer whose reputation could freeze hell over. People said he won cases by dismantling lives, one cross-examination at a time. I'd never met someone who could look straight through you and make you question if your existence was even legal. But that first night, when I walked into his penthouse, I noticed something no rumor had ever mentioned: the blood on his knuckles. He didn't say hello, didn't even glance at me when I set down my bag and limped slightly toward the kitchen. His voice was sharp, practiced, the kind of tone that made you feel like every word you said would be used against you in court. "Rules are simple," he said, unbuttoning his cuff with the same detachment someone would use to flick off a speck of dust. "You keep quiet, you follow orders, and you don't ask questions. But the thing about nurses is we notice things, like how his right hand trembled slightly when he reached for a glass, or how his shirt hit a bruise, dark and new, right below his collarbone, or how, when he thought I wasn't looking, he pressed his palm over his ribs, as if trying to hold something together before it broke. I should have looked away. I should have kept it professional. But something about him, that quiet violence, that loneliness dressed in arrogance, pulled me in. Maybe because I recognized it. It had been 6 months since the accident. 6 months since the sound of twisting metal and shattering glass ripped my world apart. I'd lost my best friend that night, and with him, the last piece of myself that believed in happy endings. The doctors called it a miracle that I survived. I called it a punishment, because every time I looked in the mirror, all I saw was a reminder of what I couldn't save. So yeah, when the agency called about a live-in position for a wealthy client, I said yes. I didn't care who he was. I just needed somewhere to exist without feeling like a ghost. What I didn't expect was to end up patching up a man who hid his heart behind lawsuits and whiskey. Elias wasn't easy to care for. He hated conversation. He hated sympathy even more. He slept 2 hours a night and worked the rest. Sometimes, I'd hear him pacing at 3 a.m., muttering to himself as if arguing with invisible opponents. Then there were the wounds. They appeared every few days: a split lip, bruised ribs, cuts on his knuckles. They weren't random. They weren't accidents. Someone was hurting him, or he was hurting someone else. One evening, as I cleaned a gash along his forearm, I finally asked, "Do you want to tell me how this happened?" He didn't answer, just stared at the city lights outside his window and whispered, almost to himself, "Some people don't deserve to be forgiven." I didn't know who he meant, but I recognized the way his voice broke at the end, because I'd said that line to myself, too, every night since the crash. A week later, everything changed. It started with a storm rain crashing against the glass, thunder rolling through the city like anger finally finding a voice. I was finishing up paperwork when Elias stumbled in, drenched, bleeding from a deep cut near his temple. His suit jacket was torn, his breathing ragged. "Jesus, Elias." I grabbed the first aid kit, my heart racing. "What the hell happened?" "Nothing," he growled, but his legs gave out halfway to the couch. Caught him barely. His weight knocked us both down, and for a split second, his face was inches from mine. I could smell the rain, the copper of blood, and something else, something raw, desperate. "Stay still," I muttered, tearing open a gauze pad. His eyes dark, exhausted, and burning with something unspoken flickered to mine. "You shouldn't care," he said softly. I froze. "What?" "You shouldn't care about someone like me." He didn't know it, but those words cut deeper than any wound I'd seen on him, because I'd spent months telling myself the same thing, that I didn't deserve care either. And maybe that's why I whispered back, "Maybe I don't know how not to." From that night on, something shifted. He stopped drinking alone. He started asking if I'd eaten. And sometimes, late at night, when the city outside was just a blur of lights and sirens, he'd sit on the couch and tell me stories from his cases, stories that made me question the thin line between justice and survival. I learned that Elias wasn't cruel, he was haunted. The wounds weren't from bar fights or strangers. They were from defending people who couldn't afford mercy in a system built on power and lies. He wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for redemption. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to believe that I could find mine too. But healing isn't simple, because the closer we grew, the more the world pushed back. His firm didn't like my presence. His clients whispered. My license was questioned when rumors spread that I was too involved with my patient. And then came the night when Elias disappeared. No calls, no messages, just silence. I found him 2 days later in an abandoned parking lot, slumped against his car, bleeding from a wound that looked deliberate. He looked up at me with a faint smile, as if he'd expected me to find him. Told you, he murmured. You shouldn't care. But I did. I cared so much it hurt. I pressed my hand against his wound, my voice shaking. You idiot, you're not dying on me. He chuckled weakly. Wouldn't dream of it. And for the first time, I saw the vulnerability he'd buried beneath all that steel. The part of him that wanted to live, even if he didn't believe he deserved to. That night, as I held him through the pain, I realized something brutal and beautiful sometimes. Love isn't about saving someone. It's about staying when they can't save themselves. And maybe that's what we both were, two broken men trying to keep each other alive in a city that had already written us off. The night I found Elias bleeding, I thought I'd lose him. Again. The ambulance lights painted the rain red and blue as paramedics loaded him in, their voices distant against the chaos in my chest. I followed, soaked to the bone, clutching his phone and wallet like they were parts of him I could keep safe. He drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering things that made no sense, names, dates, something about a deal gone wrong. I didn't care what it meant. I just wanted him to breathe. At the hospital, they rushed him into surgery. I wasn't family. I wasn't even supposed to be there. But when the nurse at the front desk asked who I was, I said the first word that came to mind, partner. She didn't question it. Hours passed. The city outside went silent, except for the rain and the hum of fluorescent lights. I sat there, fingers trembling, staring at the blood on my sleeve. It wasn't mine this time. When the doctor finally came out, I stood too fast. Is he? He's stable, she said. You can see him soon. I don't remember breathing again until I saw him. He looked smaller somehow, tubes running to his arms, the rise and fall of his chest faint but steady. The ruthless lawyer who'd terrified courtroom after courtroom was now just a man who looked painfully, beautifully human. I pulled a chair close, my voice barely a whisper. You're an idiot, you know that? His lips twitched just slightly. You called me your partner. I froze. His voice was hoarse, but his eyes were open now, watching me with that infuriating mix of amusement and tenderness. You weren't supposed to hear that, I muttered, turning away. He exhaled softly. Didn't hate it. For the next week, I stayed by his side. I told the nurses I was on leave from another unit, which wasn't exactly a lie. I made sure he ate, slept, healed. Elias didn't talk much, at least not about what happened. But one night, as the city lights blinked through the blinds, he finally said, They tried to silence me. I frowned. Who? He hesitated, eyes distant. A client I refused to represent. He's one of those men who think they own the system. He offered me money to bury a case. I said no. And he tried to kill you for it? Not directly, Elias murmured. But men like him never get blood on their own hands. I reached for his hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. You should have told someone. He looked at me like I didn't understand how the world worked, like he'd spent his whole life learning that justice was a luxury. I did, he said quietly. You. That broke me in ways I didn't expect. When he was discharged, I brought him home. His home, that glass and steel apartment that somehow felt emptier than before. He moved slower now, but he insisted on working, on pretending nothing had changed. Except everything had. He let me make coffee for him in the mornings. He let me sit beside him while he read files. And sometimes, when the nights stretched too long, he'd fall asleep on the couch, and I'd pull a blanket over him, brushing hair from his forehead like I was touching something fragile and forbidden. He never said anything when he woke up. Just that quiet look, the one that said thank you without words. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, he asked out of nowhere, "Do you ever think about what it means to deserve happiness?" I turned, knife still in hand. "Why?" He gave a faint smile. "Because I'm starting to think I don't. And you look at me like I do." I put the knife down, crossed the room, and stood in front of him. "You're not the only one who feels undeserving, Elias. But happiness isn't something you earn. Sometimes it's just something you accept." He looked up at me for a long moment. Then, softly, almost reluctantly, he said, "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," I whispered. "But maybe it's easier if we don't have to do it alone." That was the first time he reached for me. No words, no explanations, just a slow, hesitant touch of his hand on my face, his thumb brushing against the scar near my temple from the accident. It was the gentlest thing I'd felt in years. For a while, we existed in that fragile peace, two men orbiting each other, afraid to move closer, terrified to drift apart. But peace never lasts long in Elias's world. A week later, a black car started showing up across the street. Same spot, same time, every night. He noticed it first. "Don't leave the building after dark," he said one morning, his tone sharper than usual. "Why? What's going on?" "Nothing you need to worry about." Except I did. I always did. The tension grew until the air in the apartment felt electric. He worked later, drank less, but slept not at all. I caught him once, pacing the balcony at 2 a.m., phone in hand, whispering something like "they won't stop." I didn't know who they were, but I knew what fear looked like when someone tried to hide it. And Elias was terrified. The breaking point came one night when I found him burning papers in the sink. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. He didn't look up. "Protecting you." "By destroying evidence?" He dropped the lighter, turned, and grabbed my shoulders. His hands were trembling. "You don't get it. If they find you here, if they know what you've seen, then what, Elias? They'll kill me too." He went silent. And in that silence, I had my answer. I shoved his hands away. "You don't get to decide what I risk for you. You don't get to push me out to feel noble about it." "God, you're so damn stubborn," he muttered, voice breaking. "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'm not running from something worth fighting for." That's when he kissed me. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was a storm breaking months of tension, fear, guilt, all colliding into something that felt like drowning and breathing at once. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Then don't," I said. After that, there was no pretending anymore. He still hid things he always would, but the walls between us began to crack. We started sharing small, stupid things. His love for old jazz, my obsession with hospital vending machine coffee, the fact that he once dreamed of being a teacher before law school, ruined the fun out of arguing. It was those moments, not the kisses, not the nights tangled in quiet, desperate closeness, that made me fall for him. Because for once, I wasn't taking care of someone. We were taking care of each other. But the universe apparently wasn't done testing us. One morning, I woke up to find the apartment empty. His phone was on the counter, his wallet gone. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, around noon, I got a call from an unknown number. A voice said, "If you want to see your lawyer alive, come alone." And just like that, the world stopped. I didn't think. I just moved. Grabbed my coat, my phone, the first aid kit, muscle memory from a life that refused to stop saving people who didn't want to be saved. The address they gave was a warehouse near the Hudson, half abandoned, half forgotten. The kind of place where bad things waited to happen. When I pushed open the door, the air smelled of oil and rain. And there he was, tied to a chair, blood on his lip, his eyes half-lidded but alive. "Always so dramatic," I muttered, kneeling beside him. He looked at me weakly. "I told you not to come." "Yeah," I said, working on the ropes. "You should know by now I don't listen." Before I could say more, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Touch him again, and I'll make sure you don't have hands to heal with." I turned. A man stepped out, tall, expensive suit, the kind of smile that made your blood run cold. "So," he said, "you're the nurse." "Depends who's asking," I said. He chuckled. "I like you. Shame this'll have to be quick." Something inside me snapped. All the fear, the helplessness, the grief from the accident, from losing my best friend, from almost losing Elias, it all condensed into something sharp. "I'm done watching people get hurt for doing the right thing," I said. And before I knew it, I'd swung the metal tray at his face. He stumbled back, shouting. I grabbed Elias, half-dragged, half-carried him toward the exit. Bullets cracked behind us, glass shattered, alarms blared, but somehow, we made it. We didn't stop running until we reached the river. He collapsed against the railing, breathing hard, blood trickling from his shoulder. "You're insane," he panted. "Yeah," I said, pressing my hand against the wound. "But you're alive." He laughed, a raw, broken sound that turned into a sob halfway through. And then he kissed me again, softer this time, like a thank you, like an apology, like he finally believed he could still be loved after everything. That night, under the glow of police lights and river fog, I realized something: the world didn't need to understand us. We were two men who'd been broken and remade by pain, but somehow, we found each other in the wreckage. Maybe that was enough. The police took hours. Statements. Questions. More questions. They treated Elias like a suspect and me like a mistake. But when the evidence came out, the recordings, the documents he'd hidden away to expose his client's crimes, things shifted. Turns out, Elias hadn't just refused a bribe. He'd been building a case quietly, meticulously, risking everything to take down a man who'd used his firm to launder money and bury witnesses. The same man who ordered his accident. Only it wasn't supposed to end with blood and fire. As the paramedics cleaned his wounds, I sat by the ambulance, exhausted, rain mixing with tears I didn't want to admit were falling. One of the officers walked by and said, "He's lucky to have you." I didn't answer, because luck didn't feel like the right word. It felt like survival, something we both had to fight tooth and nail for. The next few weeks blurred into recovery. Elias was placed under police protection while the case went public. Cameras, reporters, headlines like, "Ruthless lawyer turns whistleblower." He hated it. The spotlight, the pity, the attention. But what he hated more was that I was dragged into it too. I'd gone from anonymous nurse to the man who saved the hero lawyer's life. News anchors said my name with careful curiosity, like they weren't sure whether to pity me or turn me into a symbol. The first time I saw Elias after his discharge, he was sitting in a hospital garden, wearing a plain gray hoodie, staring at nothing. When he saw me, something in his face broke: relief, guilt, affection, all tangled. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I'm exactly where I should be," I replied. He looked down, shaking his head. "You don't get it. I dragged you into my mess. The media won't stop. The firm's coming after me. I don't even have a job anymore." "Good," I said. He blinked. "Good." "Yeah," I said, sitting beside him. "Now you've got time to actually live for once." He let out a dry laugh, the kind that still sounded like pain. "You think I can just start over?" "You already did," I whispered, "the moment you chose to do the right thing." He stared at me for a long time, then said something that caught me completely off guard. "Move in with me." I laughed. "You just lost your penthouse, remember?" He smiled faintly. "Then move in with me somewhere smaller, somewhere quiet. No lies, no pretending." I should have said no. I should have told him we needed time, that he needed space. But the truth was, I didn't want to be anywhere else. So I said yes. We moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn, a place that smelled of coffee and second chances. Elias traded his suits for worn shirts and books. I went back to work at a community clinic. The city that once drowned us both in noise now felt bearable, softer somehow. Every morning he'd make coffee while I packed my bag. Sometimes he'd steal a kiss before I left, quick, quiet, like a secret we both still couldn't believe was allowed. At night, we'd sit on the balcony, the skyline glowing in the distance, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, a mother who worked 2 jobs, a father who left before he learned how to tie a tie. I told him about my best friend, the one I lost in the accident, and how I still dreamed of him sometimes standing in the middle of a highway, smiling like nothing hurt. Elias listened, really listened. And one night he said softly, "You know, maybe he'd be proud of you." That sentence nearly broke me, because maybe, for the first time since the crash, I believed it. Of course, peace never comes without ghosts. The trial dragged on for months. Elias testified, fearless but shaking. The defense tried to paint him as unstable, desperate, bitter. But the truth was stronger. The evidence spoke louder. And when the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, he didn't smile. He just exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for years. After the trial, we walked out of the courthouse into the sharp winter air. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. "Mr. Monroe, do you regret turning against your own firm? Is it true your nurse saved your life? Are you too?" Elias stopped walking. He turned, faced them, and said simply, "I don't regret the truth. And yes, he did save my life." Then he took my hand. Not hidden, not ashamed. The world went silent for a second, then exploded into noise. But I didn't care, because in that moment, the city didn't feel cruel anymore. Felt honest. Weeks later, on a quiet evening, I found Elias sitting on the floor of our living room, surrounded by scattered papers. "What are you doing?" I asked, amused. He looked up. "I'm writing something." "Since when do you write?" He smiled. "Since I realized I never said thank you properly." I sat beside him and saw what he was working on, a letter. Handwritten. The kind of thing people don't do anymore. "To the man who refused to stop caring, you remind me that redemption doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes from letting someone hold you when you think you're beyond saving." I stopped reading, tears blurring the rest. He took the letter back gently, folded it, and said, "It's for you. But you don't get to read the ending yet." Time softened us. We learned how to fight without running, how to comfort without fixing, how to love without apologizing for it. Sometimes we'd walk by the East River at night, the wind cold and clean, the skyline shimmering like a heartbeat. He'd take my hand always the same way, fingers sliding into mine like they belonged there. And I'd think about everything that brought us here. The crash, the pain, the fear, the fire. Maybe life doesn't give second chances, but love does. One morning, months later, he found me standing by the window watching the sunrise. "You're quiet," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking," I murmured. "About what?" "About how strange it is," I said softly, "that the worst night of my life led me to this." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Maybe that's what miracles look like, just really well-disguised tragedies." I laughed quietly. "That's the most lawyer thing you've ever said." He grinned. "Old habits die hard." Then he turned me around, cupped my face, and looked at me the way he always did, like he was still amazed I was real. "I love you," he said simply. I smiled. "Took you long enough." Later that day, we went back to the hospital, the same one where I'd first seen him broken and bleeding. This time, he was there as a volunteer, offering free legal help to patients who couldn't afford representation. Watching him talk to them, calm, patient, I felt something inside me settle. This was who he was meant to be. Not the ruthless lawyer. Not the broken man. Just Elias, flawed, human, trying. When he looked up and caught me watching, he mouthed, "What?" I shook my head, smiling. "Nothing. Just proud of you." And he smiled back, that small, rare smile that once seemed impossible. That night, as we walked home, snow began to fall. We stopped on the bridge, breath visible in the cold air. He looked at me and said, "Do you ever wonder how it all could have gone differently?" "Every day," I admitted. "But I wouldn't change it. Not even the accident?" I thought about that, the pain, the loss, the guilt that still lived somewhere in my bones. Then I looked at him. "Not even that. Because without it, I wouldn't have found you." He reached out, brushing a snowflake from my hair. Then I guess I owe fate a thank you too. I laughed softly. That's dangerously optimistic coming from you. He smiled. Maybe I'm learning. And there, under the soft fall of snow, with the city humming beneath us, he kissed me slow, sure, unafraid. It wasn't the kind of kiss that screamed passion or desperation. It was the kind that whispered we made it. When I went to bed that night, I realized something simple but powerful. I no longer felt half alive. I was whole again, because sometimes the heart doesn't need to be unbroken to love. It just needs to be seen, held, and believed in. And he did all of that for me. Months later, as spring returned, we sat on that same balcony where it all began. Elias was reading the paper, coffee in hand. I was sketching the skyline. He looked over and said, "Hey, yeah, remember that letter?" I smiled. "The one you said I couldn't read the ending of?" He nodded, handed me a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. I opened it, his handwriting steady, familiar. And if you're reading this, it means we survived it all, the fear, the guilt, the pain. It means I kept my promise to stop running. Thank you for reminding me that love isn't about who saves who. It's about choosing to stay. And if I ever forget, remind me again. Because you were the miracle after the wreckage. By the time I finished, tears blurred the city into light. He smiled, reached for my hand and said, "Still think I can't write?" I laughed through the tears. "You're getting better. And maybe that's all our story ever needed, to be two men who didn't fix each other, but learned to live again, together. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about surviving the impact and still finding the courage to hold on." Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.